Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, terror alarms, and this is now a pattern dense enough to require serious consideration. The new Bin Laden tape from Bin Laden Productions Incorporated, Napolitano's media blitz about the threat, the homegrown terror threat, and above all, this past week, the reports of a Mumbai-style attacks planned for the U.S., well, for the British, the French, the Germans, and then maybe the U.S., with the alleged participation of the phantomatic Bin Laden. And in response to this, increased drone assassinations by the U.S. in Pakistan, killing some Pakistani Rangers, that is essentially auxiliaries of the Pakistani military, during the time that Leon Panetta of the CIA is visiting, and he's the boss of this Murder Incorporated that's doing all these things, violating Pakistani airspace, killing Pakistani people on Pakistani territory, certainly without any due process or anything like that. The Pakistanis have responded by cutting the U.S. supply line through the Khyber Pass. Be interesting to see how long that holds up. Remember, last December when Obama made his West Point speech, my article on that was entitled, Obama Declares War on Pakistan. That's what it is. It's a third war. After Iraq, after Afghanistan, it's Pakistan. This is a country with 160 million people. It's 4 times the size of Iran. It's 6 to 8 times the size of Iraq. You get the idea. And it's got nuclear weapons, it's got a functioning military, it's got all these things. The U.S. has to get out of Pakistan, stop violating Pakistani sovereignty. And while you're at it, get out of Afghanistan as well. The recent Bob Woodward book shows the cynical political calculations and motives that have brought Obama to his current war policy. We also had, quite recently, General Petraeus, the neocon warmonger-in-chief, threatening Pakistan that if Pakistan doesn't do more to suppress the so-called Bin Ladenites on its own territory, that the U.S. will simply violate Pakistani sovereignty, cross the border at will, unilaterally, without consulting anybody on the Pakistani side. Great provocation by Petraeus, which is now contributed to the situation where the U.S. supply lines are cut. You can also see essays that I've written. I discussed this in more detail concerning Iraq. But when you have large concentrations of land forces, reasonably large ones, on the other side of the world in landlocked situations, way inland, no longer on the coast, but hundreds and hundreds of miles inland, the question of supply lines becomes absolutely critical. So that was the question with Route Tampa and the Kuwait City to Baghdad road. You'll find an essay by me on that, which has been distributed to every member of the U.S. Congress at various times. That also applies, as I say in these articles, to Afghanistan even more, because Afghanistan is a completely landlocked country. Iraq at least has a port on the Gulf. So the other thing is the attack, which was thought to be military primarily, may indeed be in progress in the form of the Stuxnet computer worm. This, in a certain way, may be the opening gun of what could turn out to be World War III. We have no way of knowing this, but it would certainly appear that Stuxnet is a ploy by the U.S. and or others. Israel obviously comes to mind, but other NATO powers certainly very, very much on the list. The Stuxnet computer worm attacks an industrial computer manufactured by Siemens of Germany, which is widely used around the world to control and manage industrial processes. That's for countries that still have industries. U.S. doesn't have too many, but it's largely concentrated in the developing sector. So the countries that have been hit hardest by the Stuxnet computer worm would appear to be Iran, but also China, India, Indonesia. And the question is, what kind of damage has this done? The accounts, I think, are overblown. They say that this can actually cause physical damage. It's possible. You can think of various scenarios, but I think you've got to see how does it actually pan out. The New York Times article by David Sanger, once again, in the computer worm, there's a possible biblical clue deep inside the computer worm that some specialists say is basically aimed at stopping the Iranian nuclear program. There could be a fleeting reference to the book of Esther in the Old Testament in which the Israelites preempt a Persian plot to destroy them. And this is the use of the word myrtus, M-Y-R-T-U-S, which can be read as an allusion to Esther. That this is one of the subcategories of this computer worm is called myrtus. So is it an attempt to stop the Iranian nuclear program? And what else? The problem, of course, with these viruses is once you unleash them on the world, they go everywhere. And maybe there are some of these Siemens computers in the United States or in Europe that are going to be infected by it. In terms of Iran, bad news in the form of Russia, Medvedev announcing that the S-300 surface-to-air missiles will not be delivered to Iran. There have been conflicting statements of Russian government officials whether those S-300 anti-aircraft missiles would be covered by the fourth round of sanctions passed now in June, and the authoritative opinion for the moment seems to be yes, they are covered. They will not be delivered. People can take a look at an essay by General Leonid Ivashov on the Voltaire Network website, where General Ivashov regrets, I guess, and more, this unwise decision, pointing out that these are purely defensive weapons. If ever weapons could be considered defensive and nothing but, no dual use, they're only defensive. It is these missiles. So what is the logic of saying to a country, you're not allowed to have the wherewithal to defend yourself, because if you could defend yourself, that would be destabilizing. No, destabilizing is attacks and aggression. The prevalence of defensive weapons cannot be seen as a challenge to anybody. Anyway, there's an entire question of what's going on in Russia, where I'll probably have something more to say about that in the coming weeks. You've got these talks that the U.S. has brokered between Israel and the Palestinians, essentially about to break down, as the Netanyahu government says that they will no longer honor this freeze on settlement building. And I think it's just a question of time until the pressure on Abu Abbas becomes overwhelming and he drops out of that. Remember that these were essentially eyewash. They were simply a way to make it easier for governments like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the United Arab Emirates and a few others, maybe Egypt also, make it easier for them, these Sunni Arab governments, to join in the U.S.-led front against the Persian Shiites, the Iranians, and their friends. In the middle of all this, also, the question of the Iraqi government and the tremendous frustration of the U.S., which is now increasing because of their inability to impose Alawi and Chalabi and that group of U.S. puppets, the sort of less Shiite version of a government in Iraq. It now looks like Maliki has secured, this is Maliki, the Shiite Iranian admirer, has now secured the full support of Muqtada Sadr and the Mahdi army, and he's making a bid to actually get another term as prime minister, and that's not what the U.S. wanted. So all very interesting. Back in a minute.